Welcome to the Spike Camp podcast. Spike Camp is a free online community for hunters that support conservation. It's a great place to share stories and your experience with other hunters. As a member of Spike Camp, you get access to all of our hunting live streams, discussion channels, contests, hunter resources, and events that we host. Membership to Spike Camp is free. Our only ask is that you are a member of a hunting or conservation group before you register. Head over to spikecamp.com to join us. This episode of the Spike Camp podcast is brought to you in part by OnGlass Adapter. OnGlass Adapter makes an easy-to-use digiscoping adapter that works with any phone. They use a magnetic system where you attach their mag tab to your phone, and then your device will snap perfectly into place on your spotting scope or binoculars. This product is developed and manufactured in North America, based in Idaho, USA. Visit OnGlassAdapter.com to see their system in action and order one for yourself.
All right, everybody, welcome to tonight's camp chat. Before we introduce our guest, I just want to remind everybody about the big giveaway that we're currently running. As you all know, we welcomed the Wild Sheep Foundation's Women Hunt community onto Spike Camp last month. And to celebrate this, Women Hunt has generously donated two very nice prizes for us to give away to the Spike Camp membership. So there's two prizes, and there's two ways to go about entering to win. If you engage in the Women Hunt space, so it's one of the new spaces on the left side when you're on the platform, you'll see it there. All the details on what engagement means are listed on the platform, but if you engage on the space, you'll generate points. Those points convert to entries into a draw for a Kifaru backpack system. So that's prize number one. And then the second prize is if you submit a story about a female in hunting, and it can be submitted by anybody. It could be submitted by a male, a female, a kid, whoever. If you're a member of Spike Camp and you submit the story, it'll go into a story contest, which the Women Hunt Committee will review all the stories, and they'll vote on it amongst themselves and pick a winner. And the winner will get a brand new Weatherby rifle. I think it's the Range 307, really cool looking rig in 7 PRC. And that contest, both of those run until the end of November. And again, all the details are on the platform. So tonight's guest is our buddy Jordan Kowalchuk. He is I don't know how many of you guys there are, but half of the Instagram account on the BC Backcountry crew. I checked at 4 o'clock and you guys had 9,990 followers. I don't know if you knew that, but you were real close. So maybe tonight we might get a few more and get you over the 10K mark, man.
Yeah. Right on. I think we've been over that 10K mark for a few years, and then I think we've dropped off. We're not quite as active as it used to be. So people might be getting bored with what we're showing or what we're posting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny game, right? Social media, sometimes it's, your account gets hot and it's all about what you contribute to, and it's tough. It's tough to do it.
We've dialed back. We've got focus on family and careers and stuff like that. So it's been less of a priority for us these days. We like still sharing a bit here and there, but not as much of a top priority, more of a do the hunt, focus on that. If we can capture some stuff along the way, that's great and fun to share if we can.
Yeah, well, that's cool. Maybe before we get rolling, give us a little background on Jordan and the other guys involved in your crew, and kind of tell us what the motivation was for BC Backcountry and the channel itself.
Yeah. I guess I'll try to keep it brief because that could take me a half hour. But basically, me and Ryan kicked it off together back in the early days of Instagram, and Instagram just seemed like the next kind of level in terms of platform when it started. It just in terms of kind of how you shared stuff, control you had with sharing stuff and telling stories and doing the pictures and a little bit of videos originally there. And there's just I really enjoyed it compared to Facebook or anything else that was going on. And everything that was going on was all American based. It was just pump full of American content those first few years. And it was just which is cool to see the Colorado and Utah and Idaho, kind of Wyoming, those kind of areas where they're mountain hunting and killing big bucks and stuff like that. But I was really missing out on I was man, I know there's some absolute, killers in BC, and there's some amazing hunting in BC, and there's like no content on BC stuff. So when we started it, we were just like really focused on sharing BC stuff. We just wanted to like basically not be the pioneers of it, but kind of stimulate it, try to like get some cool content. We were doing some cool backcountry stuff, and it was kind of, you know, prior to like the big backcountry rush of like people, you know, all the advent of like, you know, lightweight backpacking, teepee tents, hot tents, and all that high-end gear hadn't really, you know, been promoted on the market yet, and it was just kind of in its infancy. So we were doing all kinds of crazy stuff and building backcountry camps and packing gear in summer and like doing kind of overnight stuff. So we were trying to share that stuff and show all the fun stuff we're getting into. And then, you know, more than anything, we just wanted to share the stories and see other people doing the same kind of stuff and see other people getting it done in BC and you know, see where it goes. We didn't really have a direct kind of like connection, like we're going to do this, we're going to do that, but always wanted to kind of show hunting in like a good light, because there was a lot of like kind of anti-hunting stuff going on, and a lot of people didn't understand it. And we kind of felt like, well, if we share, you know, the fun and exciting and the hard work and share the right side of that hunting thing, we figured that'd be, you know, good impact on the community and the world and at large. So that was kind of the main goal, was just share the stories, see other people share the stories, make sure we're leaving a good impression of hunting and you know, making it kind of easy for the antis or people that are on the fence about hunting to enjoy and see the beauty in it and the fun in it. So that was one. And if we could turn it into something conservation based at some point, we probably would like to do that. And if we can help in any way along those kind of lines, it'd be obviously a goal. But yeah, so it took off really good, and we were having a lot of fun with it, and honestly connected with so many like awesome BC people, which was like not the goal, but that was like the instant kind of like great part of it, was that we were just kind of connecting with random dudes and gals across BC and further away, but like, you know, especially BC, a few good folks that have reached out, and we started chatting, and suddenly you got like really good hunting buddies that you love, you know, picking up the phone and giving a call randomly to and just chat for half an hour, about hunts and what's going on, and never would have happened without Instagram, right? So that's like kind of, I guess, the best case scenario of that was just connecting with a few good folks and making some new friendships and more buddies to hunt with, right? So anyways, yeah, that's kind of me and Ryan's background there, was starting that and sharing the story and getting people excited about hunting and trying to leave a good impression and mark on the idea of hunting and all that. And yeah, we got it pretty big pretty quick, and that's when Instagram was pretty easy. It was, you know, post lots and you know, do good photos, could do videos, and so we did really good with it for a bit, and then we kind of obviously took a bit of a step back, and you know, we didn't love creating content as like a primary goal for hunting. We didn't really want to go out in the field just to create content. It was like, we love hunting, that was the important part, and we kind of wanted to like stop focusing so much on that. So we've kind of dialed that back now, and you know, these days kind of Instagram is well, all the social media platforms, right? I don't want to be an anti-social media guy, but like, you know, it consumes a lot of time and it could be, you know, a negative experience as well. So we've kind of dialed our presence back a bit, and we still like to share, we still like to chat, we still like to show some cool stuff and some big animals if we can, and some success stories, and that kind of stuff is still fun to do. But we try to, you know, make it a second or third kind of priority in the hierarchy of priorities when we're out hunting in the woods and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's evolved. If you look at hunting and social media over the last 5-7 years, everything has changed. The platform, you know, platforms themselves have, you know, really started to dial in the censorship and all that stuff. And you get the antis are gaining a big position. And you touched on a few things there, Jordan, and a lot of those key points are reasons why we started Spike Camp, was to kind of dial in.
I like the grassroots feel and kind of going, you know, it's not going back to the forums, but it's kind of finding that sweet spot where it's, you know, it's social media in the new age, but it's forum based and more storytelling. It's more genuine and authentic. It's not a algorithm based shove stuff in your face and just keep your brain, you know, turned off, just staring at all the you know, big racks and whatever else is going on.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, long range kill shots, this and that. So, you know, I try to spend less and less time on social media, but this is the kind of like stuff that I like, right? Is I guess where it's a community.
And the key word there is community, right? We've made so many friends in the last year and a half. You know, Blake and I we've always been pretty active in the hunting space, but in general, not really out there, you know, meeting a ton of people and stuff. But I have a good circle of friends that I've built over the years, but I mean, the community itself, as it's grown, so have those relationships that we've built with like really good people. And that's the heart of it. And, you know, knock on wood, we haven't had issues. We're going to try and keep the momentum up. And I think a lot of that has to do with how we get our members, you know, like it's, you know, it's
no, for sure. I think it's cool.
Conservation based, right?
I think it's a good needed area and avenue in the social media kind of space, in the hunting community space, where it's more down to earth, and what we as, like, you know, hunters generally actually enjoy more. It's just chatting with people we care about or excited to be successful. And it's exciting to see somebody else in BC get something, be successful, but it's twice as exciting when it's somebody you actually know and talk to, and you're rooting for them to go get her done in the backcountry or wherever, right? Yeah,
exactly, for sure. So we had you on the show for last year for our first elk camp series, and you and I have actually chatted off and on throughout both elk seasons, you know, checking in, see how each other are doing and stuff. And I know this past season you were grinding. How did your season end up? How'd you guys do?
Yeah, so this season was interesting. I'll tie it into last season. So we made a jump. We were doing mostly East Kootenays hunting. We did a lot of years there, most of our hunting there, but we had always gone up north on like a short weekend trip if we hadn't tagged out in the Kootenays. So, and on those short trips, we often were successful up in the Peace. So we ended up making the jump from East Kootenays to Peace full time. So we took a bit of a plunge, went to one area we kind of knew and had killed a couple bulls in. And then just expanded on that. And what was interesting was we found twice as many elk as we expected. We thought there was these small pockets, and what we learned was there was, everywhere we went, we found elk sign. Just had to find the right type of country and terrain in the right area. But like generally there was elk all over. So that was really promising. But we ended up, I went up early. I had some work up north, and I went randomly into a 3-point zone, called in a 5-point the first day after work before it got dark. I was solo, had to work the next day, didn't want to pull the trigger and cancel the tag yet. The next night I went out, called in a 6-point beyond that 5-point, another kilometer back. Now I was too far back to pack it out on my own, because I was probably 2-3 Ks back, and I had to work again the next morning at like 4 a.m. So decided not to pull the trigger on that guy either, which I mean, I could have hung him up in the tree and butchered him and had a rough night, but you know, it was first 2 days of hunt season. I wasn't too keen on punching my tag, but long story short, I was like, this is gonna be the best hunt season of our lives. Like, we're just gonna be calling in all these bulls and tagging out. And super pumped, super excited, riding high. And then we went to our zone that we were actually planning on hunting, which was a 6-point zone, and we called in like probably about 10 5-points. The only 6-point we saw was in the headlights in the morning, heading to a spot. So we couldn't grow a point on any of those bulls. So we went home empty-handed last year, where there was no meat in the freezer. We hunted super hard, had just a blast with like nonstop elk action, multiple bull encounters in the same mornings, kind of thing. Just having a great hunt, and never killed anything, but that's made us twice as hungry. So this year we went back. So last year we were kind of middle September. This year we went back early September and late September, 2 trips. We're just trying to cover as much ground as fast as we can in terms of when's the optimal time to hunt up north, and what's the optimal spots and all that. So we're trying to do as much research as fast as we can to be productive, and then, you know, get after it and make it happen. So this year was good. We went early season. We killed a big bull moose. We both had some action in the mornings, but nothing legal in that first hunt. No 6 points, just 5 points, and very hot. So we had a lot of slow days as well, but went back with some meat, which was nice. And then on the second hunt, we grinded pretty hard to get our action. And when it would happen like simultaneously between the two groups. The morning we had Ryan and Almond were on a bull. One bugle, checked the trail cam, but while they're checking that trail cam, this bull closed the gap, and they set up and moved like 100 yards. The bull closed like 400 yards. Walked out broadside, pulled the trigger. Dead bull, easy peasy. Like, they watched him 30 yards walk through the trees broadside until he had like a perfect shot, whacked him, and then he wandered off. And then all of a sudden he was getting stronger on his feet, not weaker. And then they were trying to do that. Almond had a safety on, so because he wasn't the shooter, he didn't want to shoot. He wanted Ryan to let Ryan kill it. So he had a safety on, and then went to pull the trigger to help knock it down, and had a safety on, so he missed his opportunity. And then Ryan just couldn't get another shot and weave it through the poplars. So
Oh boy.
Yeah, we tore up that country for like between them and then me and Rick coming over and doing another grid search. We were probably like six hours between 4 guys. So it was just like full on, just grid searching, no blood, no sign, no nothing. So best we can discern, it was an ELDX out of a 270 Winchester, and this is more of a lesson for everybody listening. Let the lead fly till till the animal drops, especially with elk, and that's a lesson that people talk about, and everyone has those opinions, but then the reality hits. Like, you hit something perfect broadside, you think it's dead, you don't even worry about it, right? And then that whole idea goes out the window. Like, keep shooting, you're like, no, it's dead. But I think we had just a bullet explode on impact. We think it just was too frangible. Muzzle velocity 30 yards out of a 270, and just it must have hit the back end shoulder blade. Might have been shoulder blade, arm back when it walked broadside or something, and caught the blade or caught the bone. But needless to say, no crows showed up the next day or two or anything. But we put so much time that day looking for that bull. We only had about an hour and a half, 2 hours of daylight left, and so we were forced to go hunt nearby. And anyways, we just went to the closest spot we knew that has elk. That was within a reasonable distance, so we had some daylight. And we made a deal going in there. We're not going down to the valley. We're trying to get one up high, close to the road. And of course, we get in there. My very first cow call, we hear a little squeal. We're like, okay, we think it's kind of, same elevation. We move a little bit of country, do another call. And then, of course, it's not. It's way down in the valley.
Why wouldn't it be?
So, of course, we're like looking at each other. It's like, well, we said we're not going to do this with no daylight left and all that. But it's like, hey, it's a bugling bull. We can't not. But long story short, it was just an incredible encounter. We worked really hard with cow calls and worked into a bull sequence with a cow, hoping to pull him towards us. We got him very angry, very fired up, but he wasn't closing enough gaps. So we were running out of daylight, so we dropped right into the bottom of this gully. As soon as we crossed it to try and close gap on him some more, a bull basically crossed behind us and tried to sneak in on us. Got to see a quick look at him, and it looked like a smaller bull, and the other bull was just squealing hard and heavy. So we ended up having this bull circle us and basically come down our trail to come find us. And the main bull that was bugling us this whole time now could hear this bull behind us. So when he came in, we just shut up, sat on the hillside, and he could hear this other bull making all this noise. And so he just walked right in front of us. So big mature 6, easy 6x6. So I held off waiting for a good shot. And then he stepped up broadside at 25 yards. And so I whacked him, and then, learning from the previous day's events, I chambered again, and I whacked him again, and then I chambered again, and Rick's sitting up above me with his rifle, just, in case I needed another shot. But that was a very sick bull. He wandered off about 10 yards and then collapsed, and that was that. So it was a really cool experience, and just like no cat and mouse there. It was all aggression and excitement and full throttle and coming in really quickly. So we killed that bull, and then daylight dropped within like the next 15 minutes. So we managed to butcher him up. We packed out basically everything but the quarters. So all the neck meat, all the rib meat, back straps, tenderloins, all that stuff. So then all that was left was just the quarters and the head. But we packed that out that night, and then went back and packed them out the next morning, and worked our asses off and trying to get another 6 point, but just couldn't come up with another legal bull.
Well, you did all right. You guys.
So it was really good. We ended up killing a big whitetail. On a rainy day. It just poured for like 24 hours straight. So nice we're not whitetail guys, but that was a pretty nice whitetail. So extra meat in the box was nice, and a good way to spend a day truck hunting with the boys and just chatting, shooting the shit, and whack a whitetail along the way. So it was fun.
Right on. Well, that's cool. I mean, we could talk elk for 2 hours, I'm sure.
I know. I was going to say I should be careful here. We get to the stories because it'll just get me.
No worries. No worries. Well, we're going to switch gears to mule deer. That's what I wanted to chat with you about tonight. So one thing I've learned over the years, I talk, especially nowadays, I talk to a lot of people in the hunting space, especially the BC folks. And I'll tell you, more often than not, I hear people say, I heard it today from my buddy Don Line. I'm chatting with him on the phone today. Mule deer hunting holds a special place for most hunters. And I think, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the main one is mule deer. I guess mule deer and blacktail probably are the gateway / drug / animal for hunting when you start, right? Usually it's muley bucks in October is where you cut your teeth. And I know personally, from chatting with you, mule deer is your jam. All you got to do is look behind you. So what does mule deer hunting mean for you? Like, is it like your jam, or is it number one, number two?
I would say it's really hard to say if somebody says, "Oh, what do you like more?" I don't know if I could say elk or mule deer, but what I would say is what's funner is elk for sure. Nothing can really generate the
adrenaline. Yeah.
So it's just like it's so cool to chase elk to the country, but mule deer are just so challenging if you choose to make it so. Like if you choose to be selective and really be discerning about what you're trying to kill and how you're trying to kill it, it's so incredibly challenging. It's the most accessible animal in BC, probably, right? Like, given all the units and zones and parts of the world you can hunt in BC, mule deer is probably the most accessible, easy to go after, buy a tag, walk out the door. Most parts of BC, other than the coast, are going to have some mule deer in it, and if you drive around, you can probably find one with relative ease, right? You don't have to go too deep, too hard, too far.
Yeah, exactly.
To find them. So it's kind of interesting that, to me, it's like the most accessible, easy animal. Like when you said, like the gateway animal, right? It's a simple animal. It's long seasons for most regions. A lot of opportunity to go out. But on the flip side of that, it's like it is, in my mind, the most challenging animal to get like a mature age class, and then add in like a certain caliber of genetics and growth along with that age class, and it becomes this kind of never reachable goal of trying to kill what you deem is a reasonable buck to shoot, right? So it's very addicting and very has a special place in terms of it's not as glorious, it's not as exciting, it's not as fun at times, but there's something about that journey of like how hard it is and how much effort you have to put in to yield a result that makes you happy and excited. And I mean, that's just what hunting's all about, right? It's the struggle and the the pain chamber you go through to achieve what your goal is or make it happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's so many cool things about mule deer hunting in the West, and I think it's probably the same in a lot of the states. I know there's some variations in Alberta, Saskatchewan a little bit, but if you look at BC in particular, you got so many different ways you can hunt them. You've got so much different terrain, like you pointed out, to find them. You've got so many different times of the season that you can hunt them, depending on where you hunt and when you hunt and what your goals are. Like you look at a lot of guys go out early season alpine for mule deer, catch them in velvet up in the high country. A lot of folks that don't have time or they don't care about the huge big mule deer any buck season in October. I mean, that's a debatable thing. Should we have that for 4 weeks straight through 3/4 of the province? I guess that's up for discussion, but population seems to support it. Then you got migration hunting, you got high elevation timber, you've got open country river breaks, you've got all of those things, plus you've got different phases like the late season rut, right? Like, I mean, if you want to hunt mule deer in BC, you'll run out of excuses not to, right? Like, you're gonna find
and every one of those things you just mentioned is like, it's like you can do a 2-hour podcast probably about any one of those features, right? If hunting this type, this time, this caliber of deer, like you could spend hours discussing that, right? And BC, you can pretty much do all of that. And granted, the population is big, but the caliber and class of bucks is, it's tough, right? It's not. There's no limited draw zones. There's no management units that are trophy managed for high buck to doe ratios. So it adds a layer of complexity and toughness to it if you're trying to kill a good buck.
Exactly.
Again, like you say, that any buck season, I mean, people can argue and debate that, and what the science says is probably 10 times more convoluted and hard to sort out than we think it is. But at the same time, I think I mean, there is a touchy point there on like how big of a season we have and how much access we have and how long anybody is. But
so
the science might say that it's it's the right way to go, and you could do something different. And I think that's what most people want, is not that they know it's gonna be better if you do something different, but I think it'd be nice to see something tried, right? There's enough management units, there's enough different herds and different habitats. Experiment, right? Play with the regs, everything in the regs these days seems to be going to LEH rather than trying different management techniques. But I think everyone kind of wants just to see, like, let's try something and see if it works, right? Try,
Exactly.
2 units side by side, do different seasons and see what happens, right? But you need to have, I mean, there's a whole discussion there. You need to have more support for the bios, and you need to have more support for capturing data, right? What's the age class being harvested? How many are being harvested? All that kind of stuff to see if the results you want are being yielded, right? And if it's making an effect. But I'm not one to shame the bios or the current regulations. There's lots of opportunity. You can make it what you want to make it. There's still backcountry areas in BC. If you want it bad enough, you can still go and essentially, have a hunt the way you want to have it. And yes, you're not going to see the same population or the high, buck to doe ratios and the trophy caliber necessarily, but it doesn't mean you can't go find an old buck somewhere. It doesn't mean you can't go find a trophy buck somewhere. Like BC has it.
Yep.
They produce
They're
big
everywhere.
bucks every year across the province. There's no place that doesn't have, good bucks. There's just places that have better and sweet spots that are loaded compared to other spots, right? But I like having the opportunity, so I don't complain. I would love to see some experimentation and some changes, but at the same time, I'm not going to complain too much. It's just, unfortunate that it's been kind of status quo for so long, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Jordan, if you look at all those different, all the different aspects of mule deer hunting, from the terrain and the seasons, and the type of hunting, where do you land in that spectrum? Which style do Jordan hunt? You're obviously,
yeah. So me personally, I'm pretty much I'm pretty focused on age class, and I'm pretty focused on feed, on getting good groceries. So if I can find a spot that has that, I want to hunt it, and generally that kind of leads me to find remote places that are heavily timbered. So I'm looking for a place that is going to have less pressure. And if you're in open country, there's going to be more pressure, there's going to be more eyes, there's a lot of roads, all that kind of stuff. I'm trying to get away from that. So I guess generally I end up finding myself in some pretty thick stuff where there's good food, there's less pressure, and older age class animals, or more of the older age class animals. So I've been spending a lot of time timber hunting. So probably the last 10 years, 15 years has been mostly timber hunting. And when I say that, you need a break from it. It's it can be really, really a grind to be, on foot hunting timber all the time, especially when it's not a good rut and it's warm, or, there's predators in the area and the bucks are really skittish and you just can't bump anything on foot. So that being said, every year I go truck hunting. Every year I go check out some open country and do a lot of glassing just for, to get some action and take a break and go sit in a truck with some buddies, or go sit on a high point and glass and spend some time, right? So I try to get a bit of it all and enjoy it all, but generally I'm hunting kind of short migration deer on the rut range, the late October, early November kind of shoulder range and into the rut and wintering range where they spend the rest of the year. And so I'm trying to capture bucks in that country in a timbered area with no road access kind of thing, and just pound country. So a lot of time that's dawn till dusk on the boots. So step out in the dark in your boots and backpack and hunt all day on foot and get back in the dark kind of thing, or just before dark.
So couple questions then. So you touched on a couple things, one being good food and then timber. So when you're trying to find that remote spot, you're looking for timber. When you're trying to establish good feed within the timber system, what are you looking for? You're on Google Earth, I'm assuming, or one of our platforms.
Way too much. If there's anything else sucking my time other than social media and everything else, Google Earth is it's mapping. It's in a strange obsession for sure. I could look at terrain and topography, and I will open up 2 or 3 apps and looking at different kind of levels of satellite imagery between Google Earth. I used to use Fat Maps just a ton, which just disappeared on us.
Too bad.
Fall, which was nice to have it for the elk season for September, and then October we lost it, right? But
exactly.
But I'm using What 3 Words is a good kind of tool for its own, but it also has good imagery at times. It can be pretty up to date.
What 3 Words it's called? Okay.
Yeah, What 3 Words. We've started using it a ton. It's the whole world mapped out in 3 words. So every 3 meter by 3 meter or 3 foot by 3 foot square block of the earth has a 3 word essentially identification tag. So,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
you know, this exact square where I'm sitting in my house will have, you know, Bob, Jordan, Jack, or whatever. And if I send that to you, you open up your app, you type in Bob, Jordan, Jack, it will literally show you this little 3-meter square. So if I set a
Wow.
trail cam, I can copy that 3 words down.
Okay.
And you can use it in real
That's cool.
time. So it shows you in the map. You can navigate with it to that 3 meters or 3x3 square zone. So it's great for finding a trail. It's great for finding a trailhead, or it's great for finding trail cams. It's great for sending the location to somebody you want to, but then it has mapping imagery. So you can use satellite imagery overlay with, you know, real-time satellite information on where you are as well, right? And then plug in these 3 words. So use that one a ton too. But yeah, so I spend a ton of time on Google Maps looking for stuff. I don't look for timber necessarily, but again, if you're looking for older age class or higher, you know, numbers of older age class, you're trying to get away from access from hunters, right? Because it's just you know, the obvious thing. Go further back, go deeper.
Sure.
And just one of those things, right? If it ends up leading me to a place that ends up being heavily timbered, it's not that I'm seeking out heavy timber. It's just that, you know, you look for a place that has no roads. There's no logging. There's no, you know, big vantage points. It's like it ends up being some heavy timber. And then just, groceries. So it's like it's got to be good feed for me in the summer. If there's got to be something that looks to me like it's going to be really good feed in the summer range, and then, you know, reasonable winter range.
So is that grassy slopes and stuff, like pockets of it and things like that, or what are you looking for feed?
I mean, in terms of summer, I mean, personally, I do a lot. I would prefer to find something subalpine and up into alpine. If I can find something at the high elevation, it's just going to be and not all high elevation is wet, but a lot of high elevation is wet, right? So there's
Sure.
You know, there is some that's bone dry and wind swept and the moisture doesn't stick. But if you can find lush green forbs in the summer that are growing thick and green, like broadleaf flowers and stuff like that, like that's, you know,
We love that
deer
stuff.
food. So if you can find that, you know, knee deep and you know, some subalpine mixed in like high elevation spruce or something like that, like there's going to be good food in that. So you can find terrain like that or plateaus like that. And there's plenty of that in BC, right? So look at any high elevation plateau and you'll find that, right? So you can find that with limited access, or it's thick enough that nobody's going to be shooting early season deer in it. That's, you know, an indication for me that's probably a good spot. So I like looking at stuff like that. I don't limit myself to stuff like that, but if you can find some high elevation, like, you know, great groceries in the summer, then that's great. And then where am I going to find them in the winter, or sorry, in the fall, late season? That's kind of what I'm trying to do, is attack them in the November rut and figure out where they can winter. And ideally, that's just, you know, high quality winter range that has some, you know, various slopes. So some obviously some south facing slopes, but some southwest and southeast. That's going to have some thicker, you know, food on it. And to me, a lot of the deer don't sit on the easy, big fir, grassy underbrush south facing. They tend to use that terrain, but there might be more feed just around the corner or just over the edge onto the other side. So I do end up kind of like focusing on those shoulder areas around that prime, or what we would consider prime mule deer winter ground, right? Which can be, but I do find some bucks actually tend to stay away from that, and then next to it where there's actually more food or better cover or combination of, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned something briefly a couple of minutes back. You were talking about the stages of migration, and this is something I've noticed. So we have a piece of property in Region 5, but it's close to Region 3, and difference in elevation. And what I notice, and anyone who knows that area knows the same thing, that you'll have mule deer, you know, at that level, altitude level, all summer long. And literally as soon as September 1st comes around, or the first week of September, that first stage starts to happen and all the deer leave that first level of elevation and then kind of work their way down. And my strategy that I've kind of developed over the years, and I'm certainly not, I've killed some nice deer, but I feel like I'm learning every year. What I've found is from that point, once that first migration phase starts, you'll see different effects. One being the weather, temperatures, the change in feed, like if it goes from green to yellow, then yellow to like dead or dying. And they start to keep kind of slowly staging themselves farther down towards the winter range. And it becomes a timing game, right? Like I mentioned, this year I didn't have a lot of time for mule deer because I'm going on a whitetail hunt in Saskatchewan that I've waited 12 years for. And it's going to be right in the last week of November when I'd really like to hunt mule deer. But I was hitting one of what I call my transition spots, during that early season in October. And sometimes you find deer will hold up in those spots for 2-3 days, a week, sometimes a month, depends on weather, and then they move. So I mean, what's your strategy for kind of trying to figure out where you're going to find them along?
Yeah, I mean, what you're pointing to is I'm thinking, and I might be incorrect, but there's that transition of like, some people call it, velvet to hard horned, and, the idea of velvet that they want to stay in the open because they don't want to damage their horns, which is certainly part of it. But there's also like the exact same time they're going hard horned. Most years that feed is going from lush and green, and it just kind of falls off, right? And all of a sudden it goes to dry and kind of dried up, and then you might get your first frost even potentially, which even kills the vegetation even more. But what you seem to be talking about was maybe like a longer tract of land where they might start here and they slowly work their way all the way through, where I guess the variable there is like if deer are moving 5, 10, 15 kilometers, or they're moving 2 or 3 kilometers, right? And if they're moving 2 or 3 kilometers, it's a lot easier to figure out where they're at, because you can pretty much hunt in a day, right? You might take you 2 days, right, depending on the elevation changes and how much blowdown and stuff you have to walk through. But if you're on that longer stretch, that becomes more challenging, right? Like you're going to access from different areas. You're going to not be able to tell right away if they're in there or not by snow on the ground.
You got to hit a lot of country. You got to hit.
Spots.
So that's what I did.
But I tend to find a lot of areas I hunt, deer will still eat on that dead kind of browning, frosting, lush stuff. So they won't abandon it. They will start dabbling down lower, and a lot of time they hole up in kind of the just below subalpine before it gets to open for it's kind of thick, nasty stuff, and typically I don't even want to hunt that. So I don't chase them mid-season per se, because that stuff becomes almost near impossible to kill them in. Not saying you can't do it, but the mature deer become almost ghosts and that kind of stuff. To try to bump them is next to impossible. But I do find like the different variables there is, if you're on a larger migration, is like trying to figure out where they're going to be at that time based on that feed. My experience has been like deer will move up and down multiple times depending what the weather and stuff is.
The timber deer. You're talking about the timber deer.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. So they'll move right back up to pretty high elevation stuff and still eat that right into November if the snow allows, and the storm and the weather and where it's warm or it's cold is driving those kind of behaviors. So I don't know there's a hard and fast rule there. I think that's the problem. Is I think if you're hunting an area, it's like some areas for sure, I think the frost hits early or the veg dies and the deer are already on the move. If you look at some of the mule deer studies in BC, even the does just seem to move, like they just move, and it's not weather driven. It just happens. It's October. Get up and go. Yeah. They just get up and go, and the bucks may or may not be doing the same thing, but we don't necessarily have collars on all the bucks, so you can't tell for sure. But I definitely just think some deer have a migration, they make the move, and they're done. Yeah. I tend to find bucks that I'm hunting don't seem to be doing that as often, and 2 or 3 different areas that I hunt that are similar to that don't seem to have this deer make this main migration that they just decide to pick up and move.
Sure.
They tend to kind of do their yo-yo. They push down that feed. They're not out in the open as much because they don't need to be, and there's lots of good food. Like after that food dies in the high country or dries out, like there's still so much good feed, 200 feet of elevation.
They can stay there.
And so they can just need a little more cover, and they can just kind of feed through that stuff, and they can bed more, and they're not trying to put on weight as hard as they were in the summer. And so I feel like they just, they're a little more invisible. It's hard to find them. You don't see them as often, which is kind of why I try to put my time in as where it's most successful and most, advantageous, which is going to be late season, right? So it's late October and into November, and I'm trying to figure out where they are there, and that seems to still be a yo-yo. You walk right past the herd one day. Well, you walk up and you can't find deer, and you go higher. You find the deer at the end of the day. And so the next day you know exactly where you're going, and you walk past fresh sign in the morning because you're just hoofing it to get to that high elevation, and they've already dropped, half a kilometer or a kilometer down the mountain, and you walk right through the herd and go up to where they were yesterday, and they're not there anymore, right? So it's definitely that yo-yo where they are where they are. But once November, once the November rut hits, I do find they do have a bit of a program where they want to be where they want to be. And then if that's their primary running ground, then it's just snow that will push them down. And it has to be a lot of snow. Yeah. And so at that point, some guys will want lots of snow. I love having huge snow years. I don't typically kill more, but it's just fun because it does compress the deer. If you start getting to 16 to 24 inches of snow, if it starts hitting your knees, you will just find yourself walking out of the deer sign, and you can just see how it just pushes them down, right? And
pushes down.
They'll walk around in a foot of snow. It doesn't seem to bother them in a lot of spots. If that's where they like to rut, they'll be there with a foot of snow. But once that snow kind of, gets to 16, 20, 24 inches, 2 feet, they seem to not love that. Not that they won't blaze trails through that and still cross mountain ranges and go into other areas, but they don't spend as much time, and the does don't want to be up there as bad. So they have to kind of almost chase the does, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, a couple of neat observations there when you think about it, right? Typically I'm hunting a little bit different country than you because it doesn't have as mountainous timber, for one. Yeah. So when we get snow in the central Caribou or southern Caribou and northern region 3 up that way, you might get 6 inches, here. And then 20 kilometers away, you might get 7.5, right? So where you're talking about, it sounds to me like it's very similar to what the coastal guys are hunting, how they're hunting blacktail. Yeah. And they do the same thing. They play with the snow. One day the snow pushes them down a little bit, or the cold weather, they come down a little, and then they go yo-yo back up the hill. So, again, that speaks back to the our discussion a little earlier about all the different ways you can hunt.
Yeah, so it's less of a migration, right? Yeah, it might be, it's a migration for their winter, but it's not really a true migration of, 10 kilometers plus, where they move across a plateau until they find the winter range on the edge of it, right? And they may spend a lot of time on that plateau, until the full winter hits and comes out of, and they come out into that winter range, right? But
sure.
Yeah, I think
sorry, I was just going to say, are you using, back to the digimapping and stuff, are you using Top Notch Navigator and Gaia or any of that stuff?
I have Gaia. I've never learned how to use it, so I need to take another poke in it because I've lost my fact maps and I need something to fill that void. But I don't know. I don't know all the sophistication and tools available on Gaia.
Yeah,
I never used the other one that you mentioned there. The top, what do you call it?
Top Notch Navigator. Yeah, so that's a local BC guy, and he's got it's like a topo-based app. Blake's using it as well. Our buddy Tyler Sawicki put me onto it a few years ago, and it overlays with Gaia, and I think you can overlay it, and I'm sure someone on here will know more than me. You can overlay it onto other apps, and what it does is it shows you based on biodata all kinds of great info, but it shows you the migration paths of all the different species that do migrate. So it'll have little mule deer icons. It kind of shows you where they're headed. So that's a good tip too, is to really dig into that stuff. And that's how a lot of guys are finding at least what their routing might be, or where the concentration of deer are. Right?
Is this based on kind of some AI algorithm that's kind of
I think it's based on surveys. Survey stuff.
Okay, I was going to say, or it's based on data collected by ministry
bios and stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
cool. Yeah.
It's interesting. So I'm going to back up a couple of questions that I had. I'm always looking down at my notes. I guess your country, that your terrain and stuff that you're hunting for the big bucks and timber and some more mountainous terrain, you could probably use cameras effectively. Are you a cam guy for your mule deer?
Yep. No, for sure. I think cameras, they're such a pain in the ass. Man, they can be an absolute nightmare. But when you got them working good and things are flowing, they can be an amazing tool, right? And I think, it just takes your hunting kind of that next level when you're trying to target a certain caliber of buck. That is becomes very invaluable, right? And knowing when a buck is 4 years old and I'll use inches, but he's 4 years old and he's 160, 170 inches. It's like that's the buck that like you want to let walk and get to 5, 6 years old and older. That's gonna still put on size, get to full maturity, and that kind of goes. I feel like that's kind of a golden rule. Anybody that really gets serious about like whitetail hunting or mule deer hunting, it becomes all about age class. It's like everyone, yes,
Yeah.
Good feed for sure, and that's just gonna mean there's good deer and there's lots of deer because there's feed for them and that's why they're there. Genetics you can't control. It is random and it is every place has bad genetics. Majority of the genetics are bad. You're trying to weed through that and find good deer in that area, and maybe it's an area that has exceptional genetics and there's a few extra bigger bucks and whatnot. But the one thing that you do have good control over is age class, right? Is you want to see these animals reach full maturity. So with deer, the studies out of the States all show that like 5 years, and they have really good data on this because they do a lot of collar and they do a lot of kill checking, right? So they age the teeth, they measure the horns, they've got all this data mapping that they do with collection of killing. So the general consensus in the States that's pretty obvious is 5 years old is when a deer hits maturity. Up till age 4, their bone structure and their body is still growing. So their frame of their body is getting bigger, and then they're having to add fat on to survive the winter. And then the next spring, they're growing their bones and their muscle structure and then putting fat on to survive the winter. So all that takes away from horn growth. So once they hit age 5, you've kind of hit what their body is going to do for their lifespan. So now their spring goal is to, rebuild some burned muscle from the winter, but more or less just, put fat back on, right? And that allows them to put more energy into horn growth. And so you're going to have a full-size body at age 5. And generally then you're going to get to like the peak kind of maturity of what that animal is going to be for its life. And then between ages 5 and 10, that buck's going to, plateau for size, but, there's going to be good years of feed, bad years of feed. And so they're going to be up and down. But if you don't let an animal get to age 5, you are basically just not allowing that animal to get full maturity and get to its full, size and capabilities, right? Which is just, from a inches perspective, that's how you got to go. From a conservation perspective, it's also the right way to go, right? Like it's nothing better than taking one of the oldest age class animals out of the system, right? And knowing that it's bred for its entire lifespan and it's got a year or 2 left. I mean, that's as good as it gets for taking an animal out of the herd, right? Take the one that's about to die anyways, rather than the one that's halfway through its life. So from all perspectives you can, I mean, the age class is kind of where everyone goes once they get serious about, whitetail or mule deer hunting. It's you're trying to see an animal that's hit its potential and hit its peak and has matured, right? And then hopefully catch up with them again, right? So
yeah, exactly.
That's where the trail cam has become really helpful, right? It's like judging age in the field is insane, right? It's very, very difficult. Anybody that thinks they've got it, it's way more challenging than everyone feels. But as soon as you know an area a bit, as soon as you have cams getting an inventory of the animals that are there, and you certainly aren't going to catch them all, but you're going to catch a good swath of them, you're going to start to recognize, the age class of an animal that shows up at age 3. And he's, a nice little 4-point, and you're like, oh, that's a good looking little 4-point. And, he's got a short nose and he's small bodied and short ears and all that and lightweight antlers. And then you kind of see that buck turn into a 4-year-old. You kind of can see what age class that animal is. You might be off by a year or so, but like you're going to be kind of knowing that he's either reached 5 or 6 or not. And that allows you to kind of target an animal when it's the right time to target them, right? And the kind of animals I'm looking for nowadays is like I want to kill, a buck that's at least 5 years old, and he's reached his peak, and he's as good as he's going to get, and then I want to try and chase him at that point, right? And then that becomes the challenge: is find that buck on a good year and kill him.
Sure. So with regards to the cameras, so I'm trying to wrap my head around your strategy. So you're in an area, you've got the timbered area that you like, you've got the feed, you've got the elevation that you're after. Do you go in the summer then? If it's a new area, are you placing that camera early and are you making a couple trips in there to pull the
Yeah,
dogs,
it's a bit of a crapshoot. I generally set a lot of cameras in October.
Okay.
But that said, it's just natural evolution. I've begun I just can't get back to pull cameras. I'm running cameras right at the end of the
Easy.
season, and you might end up not making it back, so I don't pull them. So some cameras in some places do stay out year round, and then it's a challenge just to try and make sure I get back there with fresh batteries and cards to replace them and all that. But yeah, generally, if I was trying to, the areas that I'm hunting wouldn't have much action on them before October. So,
Okay.
and there's exceptions to the rule. Some deer just go for a wander randomly if
They're
feel
deer.
like it's weird. And that's what's kind of cool about having cams out year round is you see some random stuff, right? And it's really neat seeing all the deer come up out of the winter ground, growing and passing right by the cameras as they migrate back up the mountain, right? It's kind of neat when you capture some of that. You see some gnarly heavy bases coming up, and then the black bears are coming shortly behind them as they follow the green up the mountain, right? So it's pretty neat. But generally, the areas I'm hunting, I'm not, and that's not to say I don't sometimes run cams higher elevations above where I hunt in November. It's just I don't find those as useful because it's so intermittent to try and catch a deer in summer habitats and fall and early fall habitats. I don't have time to hunt them then, so the data doesn't really help me with anything, right? I've done it before. It's cool to find these animals. It's cool to see more anything than mapping where they start, where they end up, find their sheds, figure out where they wintered, and you've also connected this whole story and this whole puzzle piece. And kind of like that's how one buck lived. I saw him transition through this in October. It looked like it was when the first big snowfall hit, he was gone. And then he ended up on this place, and I found the sheds over there. And you can kind of start to see the piece of the puzzle come together, right? And every buck's different. They got different personalities. They got different kind of mindsets. So, some bucks stay super high longer, but then they end up dropping horns even lower, right? So who knows how all that stuff works? But it's just interesting to understand how those animals in that area move. Like you say in your area, like trying to figure out that elevation and when they push out and how quickly they push out and what affects their push out. Is it snow? Is it the feed dying? Is it just time of year the switch hits and they decide it's time to walk and they walk, right? So that part's kind of like pretty important to me in terms of figuring out how you're going to kill a deer. You need to kind of know where they're going and why they're going and when they're going, right? So, and I know come like the last week of October, generally a lot of bucks will start to do laps and take a poke around, and then the rut will kick in. And that pre-rut activity where they're moving lots, you can still catch them kind of doing their laps in random places and checking out all the does and laying down kind of their stature and their status in the herd, and checking out the other bucks and if they're competitors or not. And so that early season is gonna be really fun, but generally I know that like they're gonna funnel in and kind of then hit their spots and they're gonna kind of rut in their area and kind of get their zone sorted out. And it does seem like mule deer in the States and mule deer in BC, they all seem to have a zone, and whether that's a square mile or square kilometer or less, depending on the terrain, it seems to be pretty consistent. Like if you find a big buck in an area, maybe he did a walk around, maybe did cover ground, ended up 10 Ks over there, but generally most bucks, and there's exceptions to all these rules because random bucks show up randomly and you never see them again. So clearly they move 5-10 Ks, and people know that because they see a buck on a cam one place and they see him on a road 10 Ks away. So it's not like they don't move, but I guess what I would call it is like their home base. So 90% of the time it tends to end up being at place, as zone, and they spend a lot of time in that. And then snow may push them out of that zone slightly or affect it a little bit, or they get their walkabout and they do a lap and go find some does late season or something like that, or just decide they're not happy maybe or whatever it is and go stretch the legs. But generally you kind of, I look at it as that, like you can just kind of figure out there's a mature deer here, there's a mature deer here, and then there's a bunch of younger bucks there, and you kind of have these mature deer have their zones and they know what they're doing, and there could be 50 does down below them. And from my experience, they don't even necessarily care about breeding those 50 does. They might have 5 to 10 does in their area and they're plenty happy with that, and they may breed them all. And not give a crap about all the deer that are down this other area, right? And so I often do see young deer breeding those, and I often see big bucks just hang out in their spot, and if they've got what they want, they don't necessarily go and try to breed every single doe every single time. And maybe other bucks are different. Some bucks maybe just run hard and rut really hard and just try to breed everything they can, right? But as they get older, I feel like their survival instincts become more powerful and more important than the breeding instincts. And that's not to say that they aren't there for one thing only to breed, but they care less about trying to breed absolutely every single doe and fight every single buck to try and breed every single doe, right? It seems like you can kind of map these animals out, find their zone, and then you're going to hunt that deer in that zone. So if that's your target buck, he's at the age class, he's at the size, and he's the buck you want to kill. Generally, it's like, okay, you have to hunt this zone really hard until you cross paths with someone, bump him on a good day, right spot, right wind, right conditions, and get a crack at him, right?
Sure. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think that, I'm just trying to process how I would tackle, say, the situation that you described where, they're working their way not all that far, but they have their winter ground, and then they're kind of pre-rut area close to the wintering ground. That's got to be the science behind it, right? Finding that spot, that area, the general area that you think they're going to be, or you hope they're going to be come first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of November. And, you got the winter ground, and you got to kind of, it's like building a house. You start with your move-in date and you work your way back, right? You kind of think, all right, winter ground, where are they going to stay?
You start in the summer and say, I know there's so much habitat there and there's deer up there, so where do they end up, right? And you can try to figure it that way. But once you figure out the winter range, it does, to me, it's
good starting point.
I'm not saying that this is always the case, but so many places in BC that I hunt, it seems like their full winter range is so close to the running area. Like right. At that point, they would winter where they rut as long as the snow didn't push them down, kind of thing. Like they would stay there all winter, and that's where they've selected their place to rut, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my experience, but I do believe, like on the plateaus and stuff like that, there has to be deer that rut somewhere and then move way beyond that in the full winter, if depending on the place. But generally, I don't think that's as common as the other side of that, which is the rutting very close to the winter range.
Yeah. So I had an interesting experience with my first big mule deer buck in BC, and this was this is one of those areas that I would call sort of a transition zone where they could be or might not be, and it's where pretty much the same area where I killed my buck this year. But back when I shot my bigger buck, it was timbered. It was pre-forest fire, so it's had a big fire quite a few years ago now, and that whole area got torched. But we went into this area, and at that time it was harder to access. There was no road really getting in there, and I just thought, I kind of picked out what I felt were good terrain features, and I went kind of scouted my way in there. I took one of my kids in there first week of September, and we just bumped this big, huge buck with, 2 other bucks. It was a bachelor group, and my son took a shot at him. It was not the greatest conditions, and he ended up missing him, but I got a good look at him, and I saw, stickers and all kinds of goodies. And I hunted him then for that couple days. Didn't see him again after that until almost 3-4 weeks later. I had my daughter in there, and we bumped him with a doe this time. And smart mule deer bucks, dumb mule deer bucks will run 100 yards and stop and look back at you, right? They'll bounce and stop. This guy bounced all the way to the timber, got inside the timber, and then turned around and looked at us for a second and took off. And then I ended up killing that buck on the 18th of November, and he was rutting. There was bucks everywhere, but he had been in that area, that general staging area, which is basically right at a wintering area. He was there for a couple of months, but he did what I'm pretty sure he did what you were saying. He was doing his lap. Yeah. And then, I hunted that area again for a couple of years and few years, and then we had a fire, and now it's a completely different area because of the fire. It's no longer that pre-rut zone. So good advice there for sure. So
and I mean a nugget I would pull from all that is that, like, if you ever see a giant buck, it's a really good chance it wasn't just on a walkabout, right? Because it doesn't, I would say of the biggest deer, they're more likely to not be deer that travel the most, because they probably conserve energy. They probably are very particular. They want a safe area that they know. They want escape routes that they're aware of. They want to know where they're going to get attacked from. They want to know where the wind's swirling from. Like these are all habits that are naturally occurring, right? That once you hit 5 or 6 years old, like, they're going to be very aware of what's out there to kill them and what's trying to kill them and how to evade it. So they're going to feel much safer in one zone rather than covering a ton of country all the time and moving a lot, right? I'm sure there's some deer that do move a lot and cover endless country, but I think majority of the mule deer don't, and the older they get, the less they want to. So if you see a mule deer, it's a big buck, I would very much try to draw a circle around that and try to say, you know, did I find him in the center of a circle, or is he on the edge of a circle? And if he's on the edge of the circle or in the center of the circle, where are the areas I need to check to try and find that deer? And I would put, you know, at that point, it's just a ton of time, right? You just need to put the time in.
And cams. Drop some
and
cams there for sure.
right? To be able, if you can start to pinpoint one or two areas that they're hitting the cam once or twice in the same couple of weeks, it kind of really starts to tell you, well, now you can try to put that circle around those cam spots and know, okay, well, this is really going to be the zone. I will venture a little bit past all these spots, but like, chances are he's not going to show up 5 kilometers over. He's going to be somewhere around these two cam locations if he's showing up on them multiple times, right?
Yeah, and in the case of that buck, like from the moment I saw him, that bumped him that very first morning on whatever September 9th till November 18th, I was obsessed. Like I was in there every week as much as I could be trying to find him, and didn't put any cams down. But yeah, I mean, everything you're saying kind of just adds up to why that deer was there.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's talk a little bit about once you got your sort of your zone figured out, you've got some deer in mind. Let's say it's, we're now into November. What's your typical day look like when you're going into that area? Like, let's talk about like a hunting day with Jordan when he's on the trail of the buck he wants.
Yeah. Wake up with a ripping hangover because you're so excited and you drank too much last night and time's going up. No, I'm joking. No, I'm pretty much, I'm pretty much in the zone I'm hunting. I'm boots on the ground at daybreak, and based on conditions, I'm planning my day. So earlier season before the snow's deep, I'm generally pushing, into the higher areas that they tend to rut in. And kind of all these big bucks will probably have laps that, mature bucks will probably have these home ground circles that overlap, right? And so if I've got a buck targeted in an area, then I'm going to really focus my time in there. But I'm going to kind of branch into, the edges of their reaches and whatnot. But generally speaking, earlier November, snow's not too deep. I'm on foot, backpack on, kill kit, food, water, the works, and all the clothing I'm going to wear. And then it's just off I go. And I'm basically just, it's not quite still hunting in the way that people talk about still hunting and moving so slow that you just inch your way through the forest and only cover a couple hundred meters. But I'm generally hunting certain sections like that. Once I get into a zone and there's deer in there or I'm on fresh tracks, I will slow down a bit, but I generally moving a little faster than that. I'm trying to cover ground to find where the deer are at that day or bump that deer. I've never had a mule deer camera or trail camera where the deer crosses that camera every day or even 3 times a week, all season. Like, it doesn't matter how good your camera spots are. I generally, if I get a buck on that camera 2 or 3 times, it's a very good sign he's in the area. But it's unlikely I'm going to get a ton more pictures than that, right? So they just wander too much and they're not predictable enough. They're predictable enough to be in an area, not predictable enough to get on a 30-foot trail camera that's covering one little piece of terrain, right? So, so I definitely want to cover ground. I'm not like, there's no point where I think having a tree stand or sitting still hunting in one spot for a long period of time is going to be the way to do it. I will try calling, but generally I'm moving and I'm just using a grunt and I'm grunting my way through the forest. So when I find good timber, I slow it down a little bit and work my way, pick it apart a little bit slower. When I get into the shittier timber, I move a little faster to try to get through it and get to the next patch that's huntable. And I'm trying to hit as many of those like huntable patches in a day as I can. And if I get on really fresh sign, I'll, slow her down, dial it in. Or if I bump deer, I slow it down, dial it in. And I'm basically grunting my way through that country. Lots of people ask me about rattling. Definitely works. Raking definitely works, but it's just, there's only so many tools in the toolbox. And I feel like it's kind of like elk hunting. You just kind of revert to what works for you and what you feel comfortable with and what's kind of systematic and you can just kind of do over and over again. So I don't rattle. I have and I try to, but carrying a bunch of horns on my back and then stopping, pulling off my backpack, picking them off, unbuckling them. rattling, deciding when to put them away. I'd rather just cover ground in most scenarios. And that said, there's times when I think rattling would be better than what I'm doing, where there's all this fresh sign, all those fresh rubs, and you know, like tell it's that morning, it's fresh snow. It's like that might be a nice time when you've got some vantage points and you can cover some ground to, you know, rip, rake, and rattle, where you can send out a lot of noise, and hopefully maybe that buck's still in earshot. You might turn around and come for a look, but generally when the timber's so thick, I'm just gonna, if I don't have a bunch of views, I'm just gonna, or viewpoints, I'm just grunting my way through it. And so I don't pack a bunch of horns. I don't try that technique, and I know lots of people kill deer that way. I've pulled this buck here in with rattling the year I passed on him, and then I killed him the next year, like 200 yards down the slope below where I'd rattled him the year before. So
wow, cool.
Yeah, so not to say that it doesn't work. It definitely does. It's just, what's your plan for the day? And my plan is just cover ground, and the easiest way to cover ground and be effective for me is just burping. So I just grunt and burp, and that seems to either play on an aggressive mature buck that wants to come challenge you and come in for a peek, or plays on a buck that's tending a doe and he wants you to, you know, bugger off because this is his doe. And it plays to kind of calm your deer down because there's an angry buck in the area, and he's trying to have his way with whatever. And so they know that that's what the noise is, and so it allows you to kind of, you know, pass the country slightly less checked than if you were just grinding your way through it with no noise, right? So that's kind of my technique. It just seems to work effectively under most scenarios, and do a good enough job to keep deer calm, or have them come in for a look, or calm them back down after you bump them, and let them go back to feeding and rutting and doing their thing, so you can get a look at what's in the group there and see if there's a buck, you know, circling them or tending them or in the mix, right? So that's my general technique, is work my way through the mountain, and then depending on what I've seen for sign, I just base my day on that, right? And I will basically hike on foot 2 to 10 kilometers. 10 would be a really crazy day. I would say 2 to 5
especially in the timber.
Yeah, exactly. 2 to 5 would be pretty normal. If you know, the problem with some of these areas is like there's these wide swaths of stuff that's like really hard to hunt. And so you can have these big days because you're like, well, I'm either hiking right back through what I just did, or I'm going to push around into some other terrain and then come out into another route. And so all of a sudden you're just, you know, grinding and covering ground and pushing pretty hard. And then you might finish your hunt still 2Ks from camp. So then you're hiking in the dark with a headlamp 2Ks back to camp. So then that's where it's like, you know, it's not unheard of to do 10Ks in a day. It's just not the norm. I would say that 5Ks is probably the norm. And that's kind of a pretty solid day, dawn till dusk on foot. Couple breaks during the day with food or water or both, or catching a breath kind of thing. That's about it.
So I'm going to throw out an observation that I've had in hunting on foot. Like again, like you said, it's not really still hunting. It's moving tactfully through the bush. Yeah, exactly. Still hunting, like, you know, if you look at the way like these guys are hunting blacktail, for example, you are taking that 1 foot at a time and two steps and then looking. And what I've noticed over the years, because I've killed quite a few deer, not quite a few, but I've killed a few deer in that mode of going through, you know, mixed timber and just covering ground. Because there's a dramatic difference between bumping mule deer and blowing them out, right? Like, I don't know if you've noticed that too, but if you're moving slowly and all of a sudden you pick up a doe who's got you pinned, right? That's different than stepping over a hill with 10 deer, like stepping over a knob with 10 deer and they all just explode and they're gone, right?
Yeah.
And I've always found, go ahead.
I think there's a cadence and a pace that works. I think the important part is not to go trudging step, 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 step repeatedly. Like, I feel like, to me, those deer that blow out could hear you coming. It was that repetitive bipedal movement that's obvious and not the same as four-legged critters. And I feel like I've blown a lot of deer when I used to like kind of lose track and you start grinding and you're just 1 foot in front of the other, and you a lot of those deer that you bump like that seem to, like, they may have held up just for that first look or till you hit that proximity where they felt unsafe, and then you don't even get a look at them right yet. You see them bouncing through a set of trees, or you see an ass end or something like that. But I do feel like the important part is, you can make noise, but if you're grunting or you got a doe bleach or you got something, to throw out there for deer noises, that's they're gonna be tolerant of that to a certain point, but you need to take your stops, stop, look, listen, because that's how deer move. Like, I know bucks will kind of cruise and cover ground, but they're so much quieter than we are. Like, unless you're in really crunchy snow, every other snow condition, they're quieter than we are. So unless it's the worst possible snow conditions in the world, that's the only time they're as noisy as we are. And that's my scenario, right? Is I just find, any other snow condition, they can kind of tell. You got this big footprint versus this little tiny foot that just kind of drive straight through the snow and barely makes any crunching. So if you can kind of stop and wait and listen, do your grunt, do your doe bleat, do your, even the Primos cans, the doe estrus, anything like that, just kind of gives you that indication you're just a deer moving through the country, moving through the habitat, and they tend to just kind of stop and have a little bite or rub a tree or do something, right? So those little breaks in your cadence seem to help keep the deer a little calmer, even though you're making noise. In my experience, right? And I guess the counter to that is high pressure areas or areas with predators, or bad wind. So you have bad wind. Bad wind, or there's predators in the area, or it's a high pressure area. So if you're hiking around clear cuts that are heavily accessed with roads, those are harder deer to sneak up on. There's no doubt. And it's not like you shouldn't still try, because right conditions, wet and bit of ambient noise, you can still sneak up on deer, and bit of wind howling, but going the right way, you can still sneak up on deer, right? So there's lots of conditions, even in high pressure areas, you can still sneak in. But on a general normal day of hunting, some of those areas, if there's a predator in the bush, I find they're very spooky. They're very skittish. They don't want to wait to see what you are. They're just going to treat you as if you're bad news. And
you're all bad news.
Yeah. So I think that's been some of my toughest years hunting, is when there's cougars in the area or when there's wolves or both. It seems like it's so hard to get up on deer. Timber hunting becomes very unproductive. And bad wind, if you're not paying attention enough and you start hunting directly with your wind at your back, going directly where you're going, you're just bumping deer and you're not seeing them, or you're just seeing the ass end of them. And those days, it's like the wind is busting you, right? So if you can work adjacent to it, or 90 degrees to it, or even better, right, with the wind in your face, it's definitely easier. You sneak up and move a little bit, without bumping every single deer you see.
Yeah, exactly. And something I learned years ago too, from an old timer friend of mine who was kind of a mentor for me, more on moose hunting than anything, but he grew up on Vancouver Island and he hunted blacktail over there. He said to me, he said, what you got to try and do, he wasn't a still hunter in the sense where he would go 10 yards and stop and scan every leaf of a tree. But he said his strategy was to hunt the landmarks. In other words, what he would do is he'd be like, get in the timber, wind in his face, and he would pick a pine tree at 150 yards and then just work your way to that pine tree, stop, check the wind, just do a glance around, because you'll know if there's deer there, and then pick the next landmark. Might be a ridge 200 yards away. Change your speed of walking, like you said. When you get on flat ground that's got no snow and it's quiet, then you can make a little more time. So like you said, mix up your cadence, pick a landmark. I think there's different ways to
and some of that's just rules of your own psyche, right? And your attention, like if you're new to timber hunting or still hunting, it's like, it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of focus. It's incredibly demanding work, right? Like if you and I think a good rule for me is like, if I stop moving, I should be able to hear what's going around me instantly. If you stop moving and it takes you like a minute and a half before you can hear the creek trickling and other stuff happening, it's like, it means your heart rate's going too hard and your ears are adjusted to all the noise you're making, that it takes your ears and your heart rate and everything to slow down to all of a sudden like pick up on, I can hear that noise, I can hear those leaves rustling, I can hear this and that. It's like, I want to be, I pause for a second and I want to be able to pick up on every little thing that's happening around me, and it kind of tells me I'm going at like a not too fast of a pace, right? And so as soon as I'm huffing and puffing, unless there's zero visibility where I'm at, I pretty much want to catch my breath and slow it down again, right? And as soon as you're huffing and puffing, your ear, like your hearing goes to first shit, right? It's your heart rate and your lungs and everything's working, and your ears aren't hearing what's going on around you, right? So I want to hear the deer around me. I want to hear the movements, and when I make a grunt, I typically stop to catch my breath. And get my heart rate back down, and I throw a grunt out right away. So that, as my heart rate's catching up to the movement, gives them a chance to kind of, twist the head and pop a head up for a look or make a noise and make a step. And then I'll do another grunt and they'll kind of be really calm and listening. And then if nothing's happening, I'm on moving again, right? So I'm doing not a 200-meter walk. I'm doing probably closer to a 50.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm
75-meter
doing
walk,
too.
right? That'd be more common for me. That maybe even like 40 meters to 80-meter walk. It'd be kind of like pretty normal for me. Is that I'm going to make these short little spurts, stop, grunt, wait, listen, and then move. But then I'm making noise when I move, right? The only time I'm not making noise when I move is when I'm on deer and I'm just trying to keep them calm. And so I'm barely shifting my weight. I'm basically, trying to minimize my silhouette, minimize my, outlook for deer to see me. So that might be kneeling down or crouching or getting down on my ass or, shifting behind some trees. So I'm broken up and then I'm grunting and listening and watching and grunting and listening and watching until finally this deer are back to feeding and rutting and doing whatever they're doing beforehand, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're walking through the timber and this is when you get kind of out of, to me, and I mean, other people might hunt a little different and still make it work. I've seen guys in areas hunting that I've been hunting and they're pounding so much country and clearly they've killed big bucks before because they're there for a reason and working hard in an area that has big deer. And you're kind of like, they're moving really fast. And I think their whole game is just find that buck of the move that's moving fast as well. And just, hit them, catch them off guard, you're off guard, and then, run and gun kind of thing, make a shot right away. And generally I'm trying to move definitely slower than that, right? And I find for me it works better if I'm not moving that fast. So I'm stop, grunt, listen, look, grunt again, look, listen, and then move on.
Yeah, and not to mention, this one drives me nuts if I'm hunting with somebody that I'll pick this one up real quick. If they're walking and they got their head down all the time, looking at their feet, it's like, buddy, haven't you been walking since you were like 14, 15 months old? Like you should know.
Man, you gotta be Rambo,
you gotta have your head on a swivel,
man,
right?
heads on a swivel. You're looking and listening and paying attention to absolutely everything at all times. And when you get burnt out and you're grinding, that's when you can tell you're starting to lose it because you start putting your head down a little too much, looking for footing over and over again, and then you start to walk too fast, and then you start to breathe too heavy, and then you blow a bunch of deer out, and and you're like, shit, right? Got to get back focused, right? So it does take a ton of composure and focus when you're doing that. Now,
I've had people ask me this on a few occasions about mule deer. Do you see them make whitetail do scrapes and have a full-on scrape line, when they move an area? And from time to time, you'll see spots where mule deer have torn up the ground in a spot. Do you pay much attention to that when you find it? Like, do you come across that where like you'll see leaves disturbed and stuff, and they've been dinking around? I'm curious.
So little, like I've seen it so little with mule deer. I don't even know that I can feel like I'm trying to think if I've even encountered it. And like I find beds, I find where they've pissed and maybe even rubbed it in a bit, but more like a bed environment than scrape. And when you see whitetail scrapes, they're so distinct and they're very sure. They really do a lot of them. The mule deer, when you get into an area with mature mule deer, they like rubbing really hard in my mind. Like they like to do massive rubs on the willows, and that tends to be the sign that I'm looking at. Big buck tracks, I'm looking for a magnum track. I'm trying to find a really big track, and I'm trying to find really big rubs. And the bigger the rub is, doesn't necessarily mean the bigger the deer, but it does, to me, point to more testosterone, more aggression, and more focus on really getting the neck muscles going and laying some scent onto that area and dominating it, right? And so I generally take really aggressive rubs as a really good sign that it's closer to mature deer, not a 2-year-old, not a 3-year-old as likely. And I think even just like their horns, right? The older they have, the more gnarly their bases are, the more burrs and stuff they have, that they just seem to tear up trees better and easier, right? You can just shred harder. Whereas you watch a little young 2-point or 3-point rake a tree, right? They can barely knock any bark off it, right? Because their horns are just these smooth little tines. Yeah. So the bigger, the more aggressive rub is normally an exciting sign for me. I normally tend to get excited thinking, this is probably a bigger buck. It's probably mature or closer to maturity, getting the testosterone levels up. And big tracks, right? And those are kind of two telltale signs for me that like I'm kind of in the zone. So if I get in an area with a bunch of big rubs, I'm kind of like, hey, this is that zone that we talk about with the buck. This is probably in his home kilometer or so that he's hanging out in or less, and he's raking the crap out of all these trees and getting his scent down and getting ready for a fight and getting sorted out in his area.
Yeah, that's good stuff. The rubs, yeah, I forgot to mention that. That's something that you'll see from time to time too, and to be like, oh yeah, this is good. Blake and I encountered a spot where we were hunting last weekend, and you know how when you're in an area where there's a significant amount of smaller bucks, you'll see those guys, dinking around, fighting with each other, play fighting and scrapping.
Awesome, yeah.
We had a fresh snow. We were there one day and it was warm when we had fresh snow overnight, went back through the same spot, and the ground was just shredded and the deer tracks everywhere. And we ended up seeing some deer, and they were, there were some younger bucks trailing does, and we saw one actually, he was like full on lip curling 3.3x3 with 3 does going up a hill at like 25 yards, went right by us. And he was already, trying to get his licks in early before the big boys boot him out. So do you pay much attention to that kind of stuff when you're in an area that you're targeting a big buck? Are you looking for that, like, to see what the younger guys are doing, or does it even register?
Nope. I think they just get more excited easier and more often, and they don't understand it as well as the bigger bucks do. And even having it all said, I've watched young bucks breed, so not even little bucks, because you will have a 5-year-old deer that's a very small 4-point still. That's just their genetics or their caliber that they are. But young bucks, you can tell it's a young buck. I've seen young bucks breed does, and so that's my rules. I mean, I don't think that's very uncommon at all. If you look at that structure of any population, like the amount of old bucks compared to young bucks, there's always way more young bucks on the ground, right? That's just how it is. Like every year there's a crop of however many fawns, and within 1 year, those bucks are now spikes and 2 points. And within 2 years, there's all these 2s and 3s and little 4s running around. So there's a ton of those deer on there before they get cleaned up by wolves and hunters and everything else, and start to narrow that kind of pyramid of age structure, right? So by the time you get to an older deer, there's just way less of them. And that's kind of, part of why I think, necessarily those bucks don't try to breed every single doe. They're just outnumbered, right? So so they're going to pick their groups of does that they're with, and they're not necessarily going to chase every doe. So, you can find a doe in estrus, and it's not a bad idea to check on that doe or that group of does, because yes, some buck could come running in there one day and you can keep going back to it. But I'm not an adopter of that technique of like, oh, you find the does, just keep hitting them until the big buck shows up. And it's not saying that doesn't work. There's 1,000 stories out there of guys doing that, right? Of checking on the same group of does in the same area until a big buck shows up. It can definitely happen, but I'm more of a proponent of go find where the bucks are living and go get in their zone, and then hunt them in their bedroom or their territory, and be in there all the time until you catch them with some does in the right spot and get a shot at them, right? Yeah,
and I think there is some merit to guys doing that. You hear about it, and I think.
I don't think it's not a bad technique. It's just not the one I adopt. I would rather figure
me neither.
Right now, if it's different, if I went for a 3-day trip,
you don't have time.
I don't hunt, and I find a big group of does, like, damn right, I would probably go and check on that. If it's, if I can glass it or spot it or quickly walk into it and check on it, like, absolutely, it's a great technique for that. If you are just trying to find a buck in an area that you don't have the time to know anything more than that, you don't have cams to check, you don't know that there's a big buck over there or likely over there, or they always funnel into this spot. Like, if you find a good group of does, like, that is a good place to be checking on for sure. So if you can check on that daily, that's not the worst case scenario. And buck tending a doe could take most of the day, right? They might not just show up at night, make their way with them and disappear, right? There's a good chance you catch them in the morning or catch them part of the day still hanging out with that group of does. So it's definitely a viable technique, not the one I would adopt for how I'm hunting in terms of trying to find a specific buck and target a specific buck. I'm probably going to more just like figure out what his bedroom is and where I can potentially kill him in that bedroom and make that my priority.
Yeah, and I think when you look again back to our first conversation about the different types of mule deer hunting tactics and the type of hunter and goals and targets and objectives, if you really think about it, I don't know what the percentages would be, but I would say you're probably 80% or more of mule deer hunters don't have the time to, or have the access, or live in an area where they can focus like you.
Yeah, it becomes
or
you
like
have to moderate
even me, right?
strategy, right? For sure. Like, it's like It's go in, you got 2 trips or you got 3 trips, you got 1 big trip. And definitely it's a full different gamut of how you're going to find that big buck. And at that point, like I would be chasing sign. I'd be doing like I did at wood elk hunting, right? You're just going to find the herd.
Yeah.
And if you're
Find the
looking for
herd,
a mature
find the
mule deer,
sign.
then it's like, well, not only are you going to find the herd or find the deer, you're going to find the big sign. So where are those rubs? Where's the biggest track that you've seen, or a truck that's big enough to be a mature deer, and then start to plan your hunt around that. Is there any good opportunities to hunt that spot? Like that track was in thick timber crossing the road. Okay, am I going to hunt that timber? Is it a good slope? Is there lots of sign in there? I'm just going to still hunt that, or is there a bunch of openings below it, or a bunch of meadows, or a bunch of burned slopes, and then maybe that's what you're watching every morning and evening. I don't know, right? I mean, it all depends on the terrain and your experience and what you know of the area and how the deer behave, and you're gonna have to kind of figure that out. But I do think it's a lot tougher that way to like be super selective, right? You see the first good deer, it's like, well, that's potentially the only good deer you're gonna see this year, right? So it's like, how selective can you be if you don't know the caliber of the deer, or you don't have more time? It's way harder to be selective, right?
Sure. So yeah, like just to put it in perspective, how many days a year, and let's say it this way, say you have a target buck, like I'm sure you probably do. You got some in mind in a couple of your spots. You probably have more than one spot, I'm assuming. If you were to say,
probably 2 or 3 spots for sure, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So how much time a year are you spending targeting and trying to kill a big buck? If you were to just guess in your mind, it's not 5 days, I bet you. It's probably more than that.
I mean,
all the other
it is
time,
funny.
right?
It's a short window because it's November, and it's 4 weekends kind of thing, right? I might get the last week of October. I might hunt into December because I'm region 3. But yeah, generally there's years I was out every single weekend of November, even the weekend before, maybe, and even 1 weekend in November or December, overnighting in the mountains in that area. But those are 2-day weekends and 3-day weekends, and there's a lot of work getting in there. So I may even burn up half a day getting out of that country. So I might only have a morning hunt on like the Sunday. We have to bail out to get ready for work on Monday. But it would be every day of that season that I can get off. And if I can get some days off on top of that, I would. Generally now, last couple of years, like I haven't had a target buck per se in like my remote spots these last couple of years. So I've been going back to some of my other areas, trying to find, a stud buck. And so I've been kind of a couple trips in to these areas, trying to find who's new on the block, who's the random buck that I don't know about, and work them. But yeah, so if you think about it, it's 4 to 5 weekends. One of those is going to be the long weekend with November Remembrance Day. So, it's 8 to 11 days, give or take, on a given season in that area. But that's why it's more of a long game, right? For me, it's like, it's certainly not
a couple years.
Go find a deer, then go chase that deer, then go kill that deer. It's like learn an area, figure out the area, track the deer in the area. As a deer comes into age, you've maybe had him in a couple different areas for 2 or 3 years. You kind of figured out where he's landed in terms of his home, 1 kilometer spot that he likes to sit in for the rut, or goes back to year after year for the rut. Then it's like trying to kill that buck, right? And you may have bumped into him once or twice, or you may just have him on cam, but now you want to try and figure him out, and may have found sheds, may not have, but that's kind of how that ends up working. So then you're kind of working the snow line in his area that he likes to be in, and spending as many days of the season in there without putting too much pressure in an area that you blow deer out of it, that you've just harassed every doe in there and pushed them all out, so that buck actually has to leave now, right? But that's pretty rare.
Yeah, and I think too, like, again, it's back to what the individual's time goals.
I don't know for sure, right? And mule deer hunt, it's all. I mean, time's the great equalizer for mule deer in my mind. Like elk, it's just you got to get the right days, you got to get the rut, and then
timing.
You can make it happen, right? So more time definitely helps. But mule deer, it's to me, it's like you should set your sights on the amount of time and energy you're able to put into it, right? And if you can't set the time and energy away that's reasonable, then it's really hard to be selective and say, well, I'm only shooting a 5 or 6 year old deer, and you've got to be, certain, inches, got to be 170 or 180 or whatever. It's really hard to set goals if you've got just a couple kicks of the cat, a couple 3-day weekends, and you're driving from, out of region or something like that to it. Then it's going to be
and the investment in fuel and time away from home and all that stuff. Like it's a huge commitment, right? Like, that's awesome. So we are grinding the time, dude. It's flying. I knew it would be. One last question, and then we're going to do a little storytelling here. Is there anything you can think of, like a tip or a trick or a solid piece of advice that you want to throw out there to the mule deer hunters of the world? Anything that we missed?
Yeah, wow. There's so much to cover, right? I love talking mule deer. So I could go on for a couple hours here and I'm not too bored or tired of it. But yeah, I don't know. I guess yeah, I think with anything like the age matters. Like it's really important, and I can't emphasize this enough. And the thing is, this isn't like a criticism, like don't shoot young deer. You got to shoot what you have time for, and everyone's goals are different in the woods. And if it's meat in the freezer and you really want to get some bucks under your belt, there's I literally have, give nobody any flack for that whatsoever. But
evolution,
yeah, it just everyone's in there for their own reasons, right? And there's nothing wrong with anyone else's reasons, right? So I'd love it if everyone was just wanting to let every deer get old, but the reality of that probably doesn't work either, right? So you need some of the younger deer getting killed off, or else you're just going to feed the wolves and cougars with a bunch of young dumb deer that are wandering around every year. So there's gives and takes to all that. So I guess that's something that I'm not harking on. But if you're serious about big buck and you're trying to look for the big buck, like it's deer need to get old, and they need to have a good year with good feed and a good winter before that they come out of in good shape, and that's how you're going to find big bucks in my mind, right? So generally speaking, like get to know an area really well rather than cover a ton of areas. Like I think that like covering so much ground is like it will be like that lottery game of just spraying everywhere and hoping that your numbers hit. I would rather know one area really well that's mediocre than hit a couple good areas and know nothing about them and just breeze through them a couple times and not even realize that they're good areas because I don't know them well enough, right? So I think to find even an area that you think is half decent and then put the time in and learn it, that's like how you're gonna probably land a bigger buck, and probably more consistently. It might not be every year, might not be every other year, but those areas that are good, and you're gonna stumble across mature deer way more frequently in my mind, right? You just know where they tend to end up. You see the signs year after year. You find the big tracks in there every year after year. You find the big rubs in there year after year, or you just have those encounters of you saw something massive running through. So know even just a mediocre area really well, and then shoot the oldest bucks in that area, and that's what you want to do, right? And deer ages 1 through 4 are not the same as deer ages 5 through 10, right? So seeing a bunch of 2 points and 3 points and small 4 points isn't a sign that there's no big boys. Well, I've seen 20 small deer, so there's no big bucks in this area. It's like that's one species of deer. It's a 4 and under deer that's roaming around endlessly and very adventurous and very not risk adverse at all. And you're going to see them all the time. Those deer start to hit 4, 5, 6, 7 and older, and they've learned so much more about life in that country. They know where the wolves come in from. They know where the cougars like to hunt. They know where the roads are. They know where the hunters are. They know what the wind's doing. They behave differently. So they don't end up in the same clear cuts. They don't end up in the same openings. They don't end up in the same slopes as often as other deer do. So, you kind of have to hunt them as their own subspecies of mature deer in an area. So if you're not seeing them, it's not they're not there. And maybe there isn't very many, or maybe they're getting shot out quite a bit. But generally those older deer, even in a high pressure environment, they'll find a way to survive. Some will, and some will get to a better age. And if you can figure out where they like to hang out and why they like to hang out there, then you can kind of go kill them in their bedroom, right? So I think that's a key point, is like the just covering lots of ground could turn out good for you one year. But try to do that year after year, and
it's not going to be consistent.
It won't drive consistent results in my mind. I'd rather take a mediocre area and just be an expert in that mediocre area, and spend twice as much time in the mature buck country rather than just covering all sorts of ground and hoping that one of those places is big buck country and you happen to be there the right day, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll just add a couple things to that, because you and I hunt some. We're in the same region, but we're hunting very different types of terrain. It sounds like, for the most part. So one of the things that I've learned over the years is, you've got the season in October. You've got, in my area that I hunt, it's a transition area with long migration. So it's not off the mountain to the bottom and back up again. Once they're moving, they got timber. What I've learned, if you're going to try and first of all, find the deer, you can go out in October with everybody else who's out there, and we're usually hunting out there. My kids don't have the luxury of time that I have. So like my daughter this year, she had 2 days to kill a buck, and she wants a young tender buck for her freezer because all she eats is big game. And she got it done. She shot a 2-point an hour into the first day and couldn't be happier. As she said, she goes, Dad, I followed the rules. I shot my deer. I'm filling my freezer and I'm moving on with my life. Thank you. Let's go home. I'm like, perfect. That's what you want. Great. So what my observation has been consistently, and this is not rocket science, in our area that we hunt, you've got roads everywhere, but you do have what I would call semi-remote areas. In other words, you've got to get out on your feet and hit your boots to the ground. If you go 3 kilometers from a road at the end of October in that area, you're going to find deer, and they're going to be in there, 3 or more. And it was funny that Spot Blake and I were hunting. We're trying a new area in that same region, and we came across this. This observation just proved out true. We literally looked on a map, and there's roads in both directions. 5K this way and that way, 5K that way. And terrain you can't access this way. Where were the deer? Smack in the middle of it. And safe, where they can see.
I love it. I mean, I do the same thing. I do the same thing with elk, right? But elk are where they are sometimes, which can be in the roads and near the cuts. But yeah, it's the same prognosis there. Just like find that pocket where they can rut in peace and not be pushed around too much. And you're going to find older age class because they end up there because they've learned the road network, they've learned the pressure points and all that. And
exactly.
Spots, right. Let me step away for quick whiz here. I'll be right back.
Sure, sounds good. This is what we call a TV timeout, folks. Does anyone have any questions for myself or Jordan? If anybody wants, throw them out. I was just going to add too, while Jordan's gone, I posted a little story on Spike Camp about the buck that I shot a few weeks back, and we were talking about establishing a mature deer. So when I went into this one spot transition area, I came over the top of a hill, hitting my first glassing knob, and I bumped a group of bucks. There was 3 of them, and they were about 500 yards away. They ran up to the top of the hill. I pulled up my binos, and the 3 bucks were standing skylined, and there was a 2-point who I could tell right away was immature. And then there was a nice 4-point, which later in the season, I may have killed him if I hadn't tagged out and things weren't going well. But I would say he was a decent, mature 4-point. And standing beside him on the top of the hill was the goofy 2x3 that I ended up shooting, really tall 2-point. And at 500 yards, just looking, not even really through my binos, I could tell that 2-point was quite literally 25% larger than the other 2 deer. And he had a different color. He was gray in the body. He had swayed back like an old stone sheep would have, the sway back. His neck was bigger. And, he just had a beat up face, pulled up the binos, and he had a Roman nose. I couldn't see many more features until I actually ended up killing that buck. But when I skinned that deer out, I've got some photos. I think I shared them on the platform as well. I did the gutless method to pack them out. And that deer's backstrap had a full 2 inches of fat on the outside between the skin and the backstrap. It was the biggest bodied deer that I think I've ever shot in BC, and I've killed a couple big ones. But that would be the genetic monster that you want to take out of the herd. So anyway, I've got some photos of him. You can see his face has also got battle scars from his years of fighting. So, Rob, any consideration put into moon cycles? Full moon coming up soon, good or bad timing? Jordan, any thoughts on moon phases with mule deer? You pay attention to it?
No, I don't. I don't love clear skies and full moon, but and the two parts of this equation is if you're covering ground in a vehicle and you're covering, clear cuts and open country and stuff like that, like I definitely think that full moon takes its toll on your counts and running into deer every day, because they can just be out in those open areas all night, feeding, breeding, doing whatever they want. So I definitely do think it has an effect. I definitely do think it's noticeable. But if you're hunting on foot in where deer live, like they don't leave that area because there's a full moon, right? They may not be as active, so you may not bump into as many deer during the day. You may spend a little more time bedded, but you can still get them out of their beds. You can still kind of slip into all their little nooks and crannies and find them. So I don't plan any hunting around it. I don't change my tactics around it per se. And if you were in full moon in November, road hunting, my experience is find the freshest sign and then hoof it after it. And so many of those deer are going to be 50 to 200 meters into the timber, and you'll just bump those herds. Like they've done their feeding and stuff in the open, and then they step into the timber, they slow down, and they don't cover a lot of country after that, right? They don't motor 5Ks in the timber. So if you're in that full moon and like you spend your whole morning cruising and you haven't seen any deer and it's prime time and you've hit all the good spots, I would just go find those freshest tracks and then go hoof it into the timber and find them.
Yeah, I would agree on that. And I would say the only thing
sorry, just to elaborate on that, I've had a day of quadding where I just double backed on my route, and I went from 0 deer in a day, and I've literally got my deer count up to like 20 or 30 deer, just by going back to all the tracks I'd seen in the morning and just going and tucking in 5 to 10 minutes onto those tracks, and you bump the herd and no big buck, a couple little guys or a little 4-point, whatever, back out, go drive to the next spot. So it's like, that's how easy your day can go from a 0 deer day, just because they've all been active all night and not coming out for a feed yet. So definitely, like I've certainly proven that one out before.
Yeah, and I think that the one thing I would add, if you're talking about impacts on deer movement, thing I've noticed, if you get those like super windy days where it's 40, 50K all day long, just screaming, especially in cold weather. What I love is coming out the next day when that wind is gone, and freaking deer everywhere, and they just seem to, they tuck down, they hide out, they don't like it anymore. Same as moose, same idea. So
so wind and or rain and snow, but a combination of those things is like a perfect scenario for the deer not to move. I found probably 20 or 30 beds last weekend, hiking dawn till dusk, and it had been snowing for more than 24 hours on and off, and was about, let's say anywhere from 6 to 12 inches, depending on the elevation you're at. And up in 12-inch snow locations, I was finding beds with 0 snow in them, like not melted snow, not packed down snow, like 0 snow. And what you're learning from that is that a deer went and bedded at the start of that storm and did not get out of that bed for over a full day. So yes, it may have stood up and fed around 10 yards from itself, but like it was back in that seat within an hour, like not enough for like a millimeter or a half a centimeter of snow to build up and then put ice in the bottom of that bed. So deer in those crazy conditions can literally not move. So to your point, like when the conditions break, they are pent up, ready to feed, ready to get back at her and make up for lost time from not feeding for a day and a half or something like that, right? So nasty weather, they do hunker down a lot, I find.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we got one more question, and then we're gonna throw a story in if we can. Gion's asking, do you change anything up depending on the time of day? Like, is it different in the morning, or are you treating the whole day exactly the same when you're looking for the big boy?
The whole day pretty much the same. Yeah. I don't really have like a varied strategy for morning or evening or midday, and I just find when the rut hits, anything can happen. Some of these bucks, they go until they're tired, or if there's does that are in estrus, they won't lay down and have a break. They're working these does that are in estrus, and so they break when it's the right time to break. And that doesn't mean there's some sort of natural cycle to the day and they're bedding and feeding and those type of periods, but bucks do eat a lot less in the rut They spend so much more time moving and so much more time checking on does. So I just feel like you just got to be out there covering the country.
Yeah.
And yeah, midday, if they're bedded and they're in the bedding zones, it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to hunt their feeding the zones, their bedding zones. And I'm not even going to differentiate between them very, very often. It's all mixed country that they'll bed and feed in 20 feet from where they are, right? So it doesn't have to be, oh, here's a bedding zone. You got to go be careful about that and catch them in the feeding zone. It's like, all that country is intermixed in these timbered areas, right? So there is no one spot for this or one spot for that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, man. Well, we got about 5-10 minutes. Let's do a story. Yeah. What's your favorite muley story? Could be your biggest buck, one that got away, friend's buck. You tell me. Pick one.
Oh man, I guess killing Bart, which was a more recent, probably last mule deer I killed. That's a good one. So I think the fun part of that is this was a new area. This was a very remote area, and I still hunt there a fair bit, and probably continue to hunt there a fair bit for the next while. But first year putting cams in this area, I had found this area. It took me 2 or 3 years to get into this area once to check it out in the high country, and then eventually I made my way in there for a shed hunt. Found some really cool sheds. Really turned my crank. I figured, no, this is it. I found some big bucks on cam up high. Found some sheds down low. So then, and it was just so remote, I wasn't hunting it yet. So this is a 2 or 3 year adventure, getting in to decide that this is going to be the next place I'm going to hunt or put energy into and go full steam into. So I made a big push to get cams in there 1 year. Did some monster hikes and dropped some cams and scattered the area, and then pulled this buck up that I called Bart. And actually, buddy Joe Krapinski named him Bart on Instagram. So there's the fun in Instagram, right? I was like, I should name this buck, and then he said Bart, and he had spiky, straight up antlers, right? So I think you call him Bart because of his spiky hair from Simpsons. So, anyways, we named this buck Bart. But anyways, caught him at like 4 years old. Might have been 4 or 5 years old. Young buck, 4-point frame with 2 giant inlines inside of it. So he's big back forks or tall backs, decent okay fronts, and forks on both of those that were okay, and then big huge inline on this. He was a big 5x5 with brow tines. So he's all through there on multiple cams that year. Wasn't even hunting that year, so when I got the cams, found that he's on there. Figured, holy shit, this is incredible. A couple other really cool bucks on there. Fast forward 2 years later, we got him on cam again, and I killed another even older deer that was on the cams that year. Named him Stickers because he had multiple stickers coming off his side forks, his G2s. And we're starting to figure out how to hunt this area. And then the next year, and so the year between killing Stickers and killing Bart, I was in there hunting, trying to kill Bart. And we had him on cam that year. And at one point, I was walking, and I had given up hunting the spot that he was in. And I decided to go hunt lower country, and I walked across this slope, and I'm about 50 yards from this bench that I have a cam on where he was showing up or had shown up once or twice. I decided to hunt lower, and at that exact same time, 50 yards up this bench, another 50 yards back, Bart was crossing the camera going the other direction. So, it really neat scenario, and cams don't work that good that you ever really capture that much stuff, but it's kind of cool that we walked by each other. And then at the end of that day, I went and checked that cam, or maybe it was the next trip up or something. I can't remember. And he was just all over his cams. And then we went, so we never killed them, never saw him in person. I'd never seen this buck in person ever. And the next year went up there shed hunting. And of course, Rick, we went in there. Rick finds his small side. He had a big 4-point side now on one side, and he was about, I think 7 or 8 points or 9 points on the other side. Big non-typical on his one side. And so Rick finds his small side. We catch up with each other. He'd spent like 2 hours trying to find his other side, and we catch up with each other, have a chat, have a bite to eat, and then I take 100 steps the other direction, and I find his other side. And so we spend a full day shed hunting, and we literally find 2 sheds, and it happens to be the exact buck we're trying to find. and it's
Wow.
both sheds fully intact, no rodents, nothing wrong with them, like, and right in the heart of where we hunt. So like we knew this area really well. So it just kind of was that point where like this buck is so killable. He was in daylight hours, hitting the benches we hunt, hitting the trail cams that we were hunting, missing them by 100 meters kind of thing. And so that next later that year, that season, I set some cams up one weekend, middle of October. Didn't get very far in. Came back the next weekend to go set more cameras. So backpack full of cameras. On the way in, check the camera on the way in, and there's a picture of him, and it's like 2 hours old. And he just walked in the middle of October. There's no snow, and he's now just this really heavy, deep forked 4x4 with a little extra, making it a 5x4. And so all of a sudden we go from trail cam setting to like, holy shit, you like look up and you're looking around because like an hour ago this buck walked by, right? So long story short, we hunted that whole evening, didn't see a doe, didn't see a buck. Next morning, break of daylight, we're out hiking, we make plans. You're gonna hunt the low section, I'm gonna hunt the mid section. We'll meet up, around noon, figure it out from there. All morning, like 2-3 hours of hunting. Rick didn't see a doe, didn't see a buck. I didn't see a doe, didn't see a buck. Covered all the areas. He didn't show up on any of the cams that night. So we checked all the little spots. And we didn't know this. We weren't talking. We didn't have cell coverage or anything like that. So we didn't know each other's stories. But we're essentially both having the same experience. Nothing. And then I just was stuck with where to go next. And I was thinking about all these trail cam pictures of this one bench that we had covered with trail cams. And the trail goes one way, but the deer in our trail cam 90% of the time were actually crossing the trail, going the completely opposite to that and meandering up this slope. And I was like, you know what? A lot of deer have gone the other way, not followed the trail across this bench. So I was like, I'm just going to hike up. So I hiked up, got to this really steep pitch, got over the top, edge of the blowdown, edge of fur, couple of grunts, and this buck popped up, and it was Bart right away. I seen his massive fork, full adrenaline, cracked a shell in. He started running towards me because I was grunting. So he came in to kick my ass and whacked him on the run, and he piled up, and just a really neat experience. And then it was him. I was like, well, that was like one of the few times where this buck, I've known this buck for 4 years now, right? He's been on cams originally that 1 year, and 4 years later. So, he's like 8 or 9 years old at that point when I killed him. And just really neat to be able to, put that time in and get to that point and then have that final encounter and able to have a chance to have a crack at him. And yeah, it's really cool buck actually. Got him right here. It hasn't mounted, but just gigantic, gigantic back fork. So this used to be his G2 fork, and this used to be his inline. And essentially, he didn't regress necessarily, and so much. Like he was still just as big, but he did lose all his extras and all his gnarliness. But his inline kind of migrated back to here, and his G2 kind of migrated back into there, and he just shook everything on this one side and became just a big typical 4 with some gnarly bases, right?
Yeah,
really cool deer, really old timber buck, and it's really sweet to pull it all together on a buck that we had actually kind of chased for several years there and had close calls almost getting on him, right?
What a cool story. Hey, buddy, you know what? We're running out of time. It's been a pleasure. Always a blast. We got to get you on more often because there's so much more to unpack with, all the different animals and hunting and stuff. It's always a blast getting you on here, bud. Thank you very much.
No, it's super fun, man. Enjoy it myself. I love talking about it. So anytime, man, for sure.
All right, everybody. All the Spike Camp members that are on tonight. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We're going to get this one up on the podcast platform as soon as Blake gets back, because there's no frickin' way I could figure out how to do that. I'm lucky I pulled this shit off. So have a good night, everybody. Next week, Wednesday, we're going to have Wasey on. We're going to be talking whitetails with Wasey next Wednesday night. So keep an eye out on the socials and the platform, and be safe out there. Let's punch some tags, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
See you later. Thanks, bud.